Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of the teams that I think could possibly be the Washington or TCU of this year, kind of spoil the party with a little bit less talent, a little bit less hype coming into the season, but still a lot of ability on those teams. So definitely it was a lot of fun to break that down, but let's get into Heisman Watch. We've been doing this throughout the week. We've gone through every conference but the ACC, and I want to break down them really quick. So let's get into this, and the biggest thing here is there's so many guys that absolutely could make some noise, but you kind of have to consider a number of different things going into this, whether their team is good enough to win a Heisman, whether they're going to be in a position to make some of those big time plays that you've seen over the past couple of years as the Heisman moments, if you will, for some of these players. But I want to start with my dark horse, and it's the guy we were just talking about. Kyron Drones is one of those guys that can be total game changer. One of my favorite players in the country, and I think when you look at the ability with his arms and his legs, I think there's really so much that he can do this upcoming year, where he can put up a game where he just totally drags this team to victory and has 100 yards rushing and 250 through the air and 3 touchdowns, and they end up winning the game by 10 points because of his ability. So I think he's one of those types of guys. I thought about putting Grayson McCall in here, but I thought the running ability of Kyron Drones just kind of separated him just a little bit. So all of his receivers are back and experienced. 95% of the production returning, as we just talked about, on the offensive side of the ball is just insane. This team is going to be ready, and they're a really, really good team. And frankly, if he leads them to a Virginia Tech resurgence and he gets them back on the radar, and not to mention if they go to Coral Gables in Week 9 undefeated, this is going to be a guy that catches a lot of eyes, because Virginia Tech is a bigger deal than some people might think in the college football world. They definitely are someone that, if they have a big game in Blacksburg, Virginia, you're going to want to tune in. I can absolutely promise you that. And this kid is going to be the main reason you want to tune in, frankly. So it's going to be incredible to watch this guy develop. He's one of my favorite players in the country. And frankly, I think he has that ability to be the Max Duggan of this year, possibly, and kind of crash the party of some really talented quarterbacks that might be ahead of him now, but maybe at the end of the season, they're not so much. But let's move on to number 5, and it's DJ Uiagalelei. And I think this one's kind of an interesting conversation, because obviously I've talked about this on here before. I've never been huge on DJ. I think he's a really talented player. In a vacuum, I think he absolutely has the ability to be a talented player. The reality is he just hasn't shown that very much. That Notre Dame game at Clemson feels like it was a million years ago, and frankly feels like it was a different guy altogether. So it's been a long time since we've seen him hit that ceiling, but it doesn't change that ceiling is there. He definitely does have that ability, and I think Alex Atkins could be the best thing that's ever happened to DJ. I think he has the ability to put his kid in winning situations, and although the running ability isn't Jordan Travis worthy, it isn't absolutely insane, it's still there, and it's still something in his bag that he can pull off. So it'll be fascinating to watch how much they utilize that, but I do think Alex Atkins is just huge for this kid coming up into the season. The duo of Hakeem Williams and Malik Benson are absolutely solid duo. I think they're both really, really long targets, the same way we were kind of talking about Brock Vandagriff when we were talking about kind of the big-time targets that he's going to have and the people that he's going to be able to throw to. They're going to be long, and they're going to be athletic, and they're going to have that catch radius that you need. Oh, Dylan Raiola was who we were talking about earlier. I apologize. But regardless, having those big-time receivers and those guys that can go out and get a pass that might not be fully on target is huge for a guy that hasn't cracked 60% completion percentage in his career. So that's kind of the battle that you're fighting. It'll be really interesting to watch this guy develop. The ceiling is still absolutely there, and the ceiling is really high, to be totally honest with you, but it's been a while since we've seen him hit it, so a lot of people are skeptical, and I fully understand that. But let's move on to number 4, and Omarion Hampton has to get some respect in this conversation, because he's one of those guys where if the offense isn't built around him, it's coaching malpractice. I don't know what you're doing if you're not handing this guy the ball almost every play, to be totally honest with you. Obviously, you want to keep him healthy, but man, if you could turn off fatigue and just let him run the ball, you would. This dude is absolutely incredible, and I think he needs to average like 20 carries a game. He probably needs to get to that 2,000-yard marker possibly, or maybe just be a little bit more of a threat in the passing game. Whatever it takes, I don't know. But the reality is he's going to have to do a lot to make this happen. It's been a long time since a running back has even made it to the New York City to be in that ceremony. So it'll be fascinating to watch this kind of develop. But I think when you look across the country, this might be the guy that's most set up to win or to get that type of run because of the offense that he's playing in. I think Donovan Edwards would be the other guy that absolutely has that path where they're going to be running the ball a lot, and if he doesn't perform, then they're not going to be that great of a team, and it won't be a conversation anyway. But if he performs at a high level, they could get to that 9-win marker and could be that team that possibly sends a wild card into New York City, which would be very, very cool. But let's go over to the defensive side and let's talk about Patrick Payton, because we've talked about Abdul Carter in the Big Ten. We talked about James Pierce Jr. in the SEC. Same situation here with Patrick Payton. He is a guy that is going to have a game where 3 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, a fumble recovery type game, and just totally win the game by himself for Florida State essentially. And there are very few people in the country that can do that. And the good news for him is he's not necessarily the only guy that they have rushing the passer. In fact, they have a number of guys that will be. But Marvin Jones Jr. coming over from Georgia is absolutely huge for him. Definitely a very talented pass rusher. DJ Lundy is going to be able to rush the passer a ton this upcoming season. So there's not going to be a lot of times where O-lines can outright double this kid. And that's a nightmare for every single offensive tackle in the country. So it'll be fascinating to watch. I think he can totally wreck a game. And frankly, I think he probably, won't get an invite to NYC because he plays on defense. Let's just be totally honest here. But I'd love to see this kid get there. And frankly, he could be the best player in the country and still not get an invite because he's a defensive player. So it'll be interesting to watch this develop, but absolutely love this player. And I think when you talk about defensive players that can just go win a game for you, he's very much high on that list. But let's get to number 2, and it's Cade Klubnik. And this is kind of the same argument we had with DJ, where he hasn't necessarily hit his ceiling that we all kind of hoped for him when he came into Clemson, and there's been some extenuating circumstances. Obviously, the OC change last year did not necessarily help him get off to the best start, and I think him and Garrett Riley, we're just not on the same page. But the reality is, Garrett Riley's a great offensive mind. Cade Klubnik has tons of tools that are really, really good. If they get on the same page, this offense could be really potent. I think Tyler Brown is a really good player and is someone I like a lot at that wide receiver position. Antonio Williams, an experienced target who I feel like has been there for like a decade at this point, to be totally honest with you, but a very talented player nonetheless. Bryant Wesco coming in as a freshman has gotten absolutely rave reviews, so it feels like he has more guys to pass to than he has in the past, which is a huge, huge thing. But I think this is still going to be a really good team. They're probably going to win 9 games, so he likely will get over that, threshold that has kind of been built up over the last couple of, really the last decade, or last 2 decades, really. So it'll be interesting to kind of watch this, but the reality is, this kid has a really high ceiling. He can make a ton of different throws on the football field. There was a reason that he was as highly recruited as he was coming out of high school, and I still think the ceiling is just through the roof. So as long as him and Garrett Riley are on the same page, I think he can put up Heisman-type numbers. The question is, can that happen, and how quickly can that happen? Because he pretty much has to come out of the gate slinging. He doesn't necessarily have to beat Georgia in the opening week, but he's got to show that he can hang with those top-level teams. And if he can't, then there will be some people kind of tearing him down before his season even really gets going. So it'll be an interesting thing to watch, but the talent with this kid is kind of undeniable at this point, and I think as long as him and Garrett Riley are working off the same page, they'll be rolling. There's no doubt about that. And then Cam Ward is the final guy. This is an easy number 1 for me, if I'm being totally honest. I think he's in the best position to make plays with his legs and his arm, to have the number of weapons that he needs to win this conference, to possibly go to the playoff. Everything's kind of in place for him to make this type of run. You have Sam Brown, the transfer from Houston. You have Jacoby George, and then especially Xavier Restrepo, one of the most talented wide receivers in the entire country. He's going to have really good numbers through the air. As long as they can protect this guy, which they have a really good offensive line as well, they're going to be more than fine. And the good news for him is the running game is not going to lack by any means. So he won't necessarily be bear down on a ton and tons of people kind of spreading out across the field to just make it impossible for him to throw the ball. Damian Martinez and Mark Fletcher Jr. are a really good duo and are going to force defenses to collapse into the box a little bit, and then you throw it over top of them, which is something Cam Ward does just incredibly well. And I think one of the things in this offense that didn't work last year that will work this upcoming year is the quarterback run game. I think it's something that they probably wanted to utilize a little bit with Shane Dawson a year ago, but they couldn't because Tyler Van Dyke is not necessarily the runner that Cam Ward is. So it'll be fascinating to watch how much that kind of plays a part, but I'd be surprised if it didn't play not a hugely significant part, but definitely play a part in what they do in game plans just because it keeps defenses on their toes. So if this is a guy that leads Miami back to the mountaintop, gets them on top of the ACC, and has crazy numbers on the way, frankly, I would be surprised if he didn't get an invite to NYC. I think the storyline by itself would just be incredible. So there's tons of guys to watch, obviously. We've rolled through all of the power conferences at this point, so if you want to go check out all those videos, definitely go do that. But there's tons to break down. I mean, there's tons of guys that I didn't even name in this that absolutely could make a run at this. So it's going to be incredible to watch. The Heisman is always a thing where we go into the season with such high hopes, and sometimes it really, really pans out the way that we want it to. I think last year was one of those years. Watching Jaden Daniels do what he did was just insane. But I think this year could be just as special, and I think there could be a guy that crashes the party possibly from one of these smaller conferences. So it'll be fascinating to watch all of that unfold. Maybe I'll do a group of 5 segment tomorrow, who knows. But let's take our last break here, and when we come back, we have a Hot Take Thursday for you, and I'm going to talk about Lincoln Riley and why I think 2024 is just the most important year in his coaching career thus far. So I want to break that down right after this, so stick with us.